presentation is brought to you by the Beljanski Foundation. Over 50 years of research towards curing cancer the natural way.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for the nice introduction, and welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Mathew Silverman. I practice internal and functional medicine in Bergen County, New Jersey. Anybody here from New Jersey? Yeah? Where are you from? Okay, so I practice in Bergen County in Saddlebrook. It's near Hackensack, if anybody's familiar with that area. And I have a practice called the Peaceful Practice because I wanted to have a more sane practice in this era of healthcare, which we all can agree is insane. So I want to have a different type of way of practicing and taking care of patients for that matter. So today I'm going to be talking about your thyroid, and I think we all have to rethink about how we think about the thyroid, because in the past we talked just about giving thyroid hormone replacement, which I'll talk about. But I think that's appropriate in this type of a conference because we're talking about human optimization. So, everybody doesn't fit along, a certain range, like a laboratory test. Everybody is different. Everybody has their own optimal way of feeling. So thyroid is no different. Just because somebody is in the normal reference range doesn't mean that they're necessarily better or they feel well. So we have to individualize it for every patient, and that includes the thyroid. So how many people here feel like this? Have either fatigue, weight gain, cold feeling, dry hair and skin, depression, memory and concentration issues? Anybody feel like that in the room? A lot of people. So certainly a lot of these symptoms can be related to thyroid. It's not necessarily just thyroid, but they can be related to the thyroid. And most of the time when you go to your doctor's office, he's going to check your thyroid. I mean, that's the way I feel when a patient comes into my office. It's one of the first things I think about, especially if it's the right type of patient. It's certainly an important thing because the thyroid encompasses a lot of different symptoms. So these are all important, and fatigue, obviously, everybody is fatigued, but it's more than just fatigue. And a lot of times we have to do thyroid testing to really rule out thyroid conditions. So normal versus optimal in terms of thyroid. So reference ranges are very wide. I mean, there's been a lot of talk to say that we should narrow the reference ranges because people can be on all points on that reference range and still have symptoms of hypothyroidism or underactive thyroid, even though they may be normal. So that's one thing that you have to understand with that. And just because TSH, T4, and T3 are normal doesn't mean that's optimal, as I just said. And I'll talk about what T4 and T3 are. Usually we think about primary hypothyroidism as an elevated TSH and a low T4 because TSH and T4 work as a negative feedback mechanism because TSH is made by the pituitary, which acts on the thyroid. So if there's low amounts of T4, there's a negative feedback. There's got to be more stimulating hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, to stimulate the thyroid to make more thyroid hormone. The body it's amazing how, as somebody was talking about the way the body is engineered, that it's able to do this. It's able to sense whether there's not enough thyroid hormone and to make more of it. And more commonly, what I see in practice is people have a normal TSH, they'll have a normal T4 or specifically free T4, but they'll have a low normal free T3 because T4 has to be converted to T3 by a certain enzyme called a deiodinase enzyme. That's hard to say a couple times. And so people have conversion problems. So it's not just that they're deficient in the actual hormones, but they're deficient in the way the body converts one hormone to the other. And that's what makes them hypothyroid. So I know this is a little bit difficult to see on the slide, but basically what you have on the top is the hypothalamus, works on the pituitary gland, which is basically in the center of your skull. It's like if you look straight down, it's like kind of like a little tiny gland in your skull. And then your thyroid, which is right here in your neck. And what happens is that the thyroid makes T4, and it converts it into either T3, which is on the right-hand side, or something called reverse T3, which is kind of a hormone that really doesn't have much effect on the body, but somehow when the body can't make enough T3, it by default converts it to reverse T3. And you can measure this in blood tests. A lot of endocrinologists that I work with don't believe in looking at this. They just think TSH is the only level to look at. But I test all the time for not only TSH, but free T4, free T3, and reverse T3. And then factors that affect it, again, it's hard to I know it's difficult to read this, but one of the most important things I want you to understand is on the right-hand side where you have those three in the dark blue, the middle one is factors that affect the conversion of T4 to T3. And one of the two big things that's listed there is selenium and zinc, which are minerals that you can find in most vegetables. Selenium, very high in Brazil nuts and other kind of nuts. So a lot of people are deficient in selenium and zinc to be able to convert this T4 to T3. And a major cause is aside from just people not eating a good, healthy diet, rich in vegetables and nuts, is the type of soil that vegetables are grown in, which, based on farming practice, erodes the soil, depletes it of the good minerals that you need that go into the food that you eat. So a lot of people are deficient in these minerals. And that's why I see a lot of problems with people's patients' T3 level, free T level especially. So also vitamin A is very important, and vitamin D. So I don't routinely check for vitamin A from a blood test, but vitamin D, I screen all my patients for vitamin D. I'm sure a lot of you who go to your physicians will get a vitamin D level. I mean, vitamin D, we know in recent years is good for a whole host of things. It's an immune modulator. It modulates inflammation. It's also good for your bones. So all these cofactors and minerals are important to a efficient production of thyroid hormone. So how do I approach the thyroid? I know there's a lot listed here, but something called a timeline, which is basically a way of looking at the patient's whole story, not just taking like their history of present illness, which is the conventional way physicians treat. They're just looking at the one illness that you're coming into the office for. But this is the whole life history of the patient from prenatal, before they're even born, to the day that they're in your office. And what has happened over that long or short period of time that brings you into their office that particular day. And especially what I ask for is, when was the last time you felt well? And when was the last time you went to your doctor's office and they asked you that? When was the last time you felt well? Probably never, right? I mean, nobody really asks you, because it's not about feeling good or not good. It's about your disease. Can they treat your hypertension, your diabetes, your hypothyroidism, and all the other kind of things that you're there for. But when did you feel well? And it's all about you. That's why I approach my patients like this. It's you. How do you feel? Not just what your conditions are. And then a matrix is basically a way of looking at all of the different imbalances in the body, whether it has to do with assimilation or digestion, whether it has to do with defense and repair, which has to do with your immune system, communication, which involves hormones, and that has to do with thyroid in part, and toxicity. I was here for the talk on heavy metal toxicity. Very, very important factor in disease is heavy metals that's overlooked. I have a patient of mine who had extreme levels of lead toxicity, and really contributed. He had severe neuropathy. I think had a lot to do with his neuropathy and neuropathic pain. So those are things that I use first. I look at the patient first. Before I do any kind of blood test, before I look at their thyroid, it's all about who is that patient? Where have they come from? Why are they here? What have they been through that brings them to my office that day? And so I do obviously TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3. And what's important that I use, more important than looking at the absolute levels is a ratio. So I look at free T3 over free T4, and if the ratio is less than 0.33, then that gives me a lot of reason to supplement with thyroid replacement, and also to supplement them with selenium and zinc, which I'll talk about here. I do an RBC zinc, which you can do on a blood test that's more accurate than a serum zinc level, gives us a more accurate level of the body's stores of zinc. Obviously, everybody is familiar with iodine and its relationship with thyroid disease. So a spot urine iodine is what I'll use to check for iodine. There are practitioners that use a 24-hour urine collection for iodine, but it's very cumbersome. Nobody really wants to collect their urine for 24 hours. So it's a lot easier just to get a spot urine iodine, very easy to get. And then antithyroglobulin, thyroperoxidase antibodies, very important for something called Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune type of thyroid disease or inflammation. So I see a lot of that, even with normal thyroid levels. So somebody may have Hashimoto's or autoimmune thyroiditis, but they may have normal levels, and they still could feel hypothyroid, even though their thyroid levels may be completely normal. And as I mentioned, RBC zinc, vitamin D, ferritin, iron is a big factor in thyroid production. So a ferritin level or the body's stores of iron is very important to get an idea of how much iron is in the body. And last but not least is the microbiome. I mean, there's some evidence that shows that gastrointestinal well-being, especially the imbalance of good and bad bacteria, has an effect, especially something called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with that, but that has some correlation with thyroid disease. So it's important to look at the microbiome to see if somebody has an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. In my experience, I see a lot of patients that have zero lactobacillus, and lactobacillus is the most important beneficial bacteria you can have in your gut. And I most of the time see people have zero amounts of lactobacillus. They may have some bad bacteria that may be pathogenic, but invariably they will have no good bacteria. It's kind of scary in a way that people are not getting the kind of food or not eating the kind of fiber that will promote the growth of this type of bacteria. So, and it has it has a lot to do with health and disease. And so how do I treat? Selenium, again, Brazil nuts have a lot of selenium in it, but you can supplement with a selenium supplement. Zinc, obviously. Vitamin D, I mean, most of the time, most of my patients need at least 2,000 units of vitamin D. A lot of times they'll need more, maybe 5,000 units. Vitamin A, iodine, an elimination diet to treat the guts, to get rid of gluten and dairy, most commonly that affects the microbiome and gastrointestinal problems. Stress reduction, a detox program. LDN, low-dose naltrexone. I've used low-dose naltrexone in a patient with autoimmune thyroiditis. Find it works very well. There's a compounding pharmacy out there that actually has low-dose naltrexone. And again, thyroid replacement, either T4, which is levothyroxine, which most people are on, T3 or Cytomel. Synthroid is the brand name for T4, Cytomel for T3, and either a desiccated combination of T4 and T3. Most commonly, one's called Nature-Throid, which is a combination of both. And of course, depending on the patient, they'll either need one or a combination, or they may not need any thyroid replacement at all. Sometimes just treating the zinc, selenium, reducing their stress, getting the right type of bacteria in their gut. A lot of times that will help. They don't always need to have thyroid replacement to affect their thyroid. And of course, one other thing, I would always get if somebody has thyroiditis, always get a thyroid ultrasound just to check their thyroid, make sure there's no goiter, and make sure there's no masses or anything like that, because that's another form of thyroid disease that you always have to be mindful of. And getting beyond the thyroid, these are called obesogens. These are things that cause weight gain. Certainly toxins like pesticides, high fructose corn syrup, which they're trying to do away of in foods today. Phthalates, which are cosmetics, personal care products, and air pollutants. If anybody wants to come and talk with me after the talk, if they have a personal issue with their thyroid, I'd be happy to talk with them here. You can work with me if you schedule on my website, which is www.thepeacefulpractice.com. My phone number is there. I can give you a free 15-minute consultation about your own individual situation. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody else after the talk. Okay, thank you.